democracy will be on the ballot this November, of course. A slate of candidates from one of the country's two major political parties has broken bad. It is still led by the disgraced, twice impeached ex-president, whose lies about the 2020 election sit right at the nexus of a domestic violent extremism threat today. That faction is seeking to overturn the will of voters in future elections should they prevail in 2022. And they made that point abundantly clear, as if it was not already, at back-to-back rallies of the weekend, headlined by the ex-president in two of the key battleground states. About this election in 2024, they pledged to do that in Arizona and Nevada. Here's what the Republican nominee for Secretary of State in Nevada, Jim Marchant, had to say.
President Trump and I lost an election in 2020 because of a rigged election. I've been working since November 4th, 2020 to expose what happened. And what I found out is horrifying. And when I'm Secretary of State of Nevada, we're going to fix it. And when my coalition of Secretary of State candidates around the country get elected, we're going to fix the whole country. And President Trump is going to be president again in 2024.
Oh, no, he's not.
So that really happened. And just a little fact check here along the way, you lost because the voters weren't that into either of you. Those comments are confirmation, as though we needed it, of the five-alarm fire facing our democracy in November. Here's why. According to NBC News, quote, along with Arizona and Michigan, Nevada is one of several key battleground states where an election denier backed by ex-President Donald Trump is running for Secretary of State. It's a position that in most states oversees elections. Nonpartisan groups monitoring races with election deniers warn that any of those candidates winning could contribute to an even more robust effort to overturn the next presidential election. At a rally in Arizona on Sunday, Trump took the stage alongside, shoulder to shoulder, with a slate of Republican candidates who appeared to be trying to two-step away from their belief and advocacy of everything that goes with the big lie. From new reporting in the Arizona Republic, quote, the lineup of Republican candidates for office in Arizona, all of whom have repeated Trump's false claims that he won in 2020, offered sanitized messages that instead focused on public safety, the economy, and attacks on opponents and the media. Whitewashed messages completely undermine the fact that they have already publicly embraced the ex-president, who, according to the Arizona Republic, quote, was not ready to move forward, as he repeatedly claimed he won Arizona in 2020. None of several lawsuits here, nor the Arizona Senate Republicans' ballot review, found evidence that Trump won. And Donald Trump took his election denialism even further, suggesting that the 2022 midterms could be rigged, urging his supporters to reject the results of midterm races if Republican candidates lose, and stoking distrust of the vote count by saying this, quote, the vote counter is oftentimes far more important than the candidate, end quote. Only if you're cheating, it's a dangerous situation, made more complicated by the fact that the future of our democracy is quite literally on the line in practically every race on the ballot, all the way down to state legislative contests. New York Times reports this, quote, 44% of Republicans in crucial swing state legislatures use the power of their office to discredit or try to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. That's according to New York Times analysis. More like-minded GOP candidates on the ballot could soon join them in office. The future of elections in America and our democracy itself on the ballot in the midterms is where we start today. NBC News correspondent Von Hilliard joins us live from Phoenix. Also joining us, Ari Berman, senior reporter from Mother Jones. We're happy to see you again, my friend. Plus, A.B. Stoddard is here, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. And our friend, former senator and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill is here. Claire, have we been here before? I mean, the country has been in crisis. It's been in ugly political divisions and intense disagreements about matters of war and peace. But have we been in a place before where there is such a divergence between what the truth is when it comes to our actual election integrity?
No, we have not. We have not been in this place before. And the difference is that our country has taken for granted that the people who were monitoring elections wanted to actually count votes rather than determine outcomes. And it is only with Trump who set this up months before in November of 2016, set this up months before he was defeated in 2020, that somehow if he lost, he was cheated. And now it's become foundational to their party. And it is a huge, huge problem. I remember back in the day, Nicole, when the United States used to send election monitors all over the world to watch and make sure elections were held fairly. If people don't show up and vote in November in these midterms, we will have to have other countries sending monitors to America to watch our votes.
Should we ask for that now? I mean, what has to happen for it to be worse?
Well, I think that the problem, if these people get elected who are determined to change the outcome of the voters, and if they try to do that, it is the most serious crime that could occur in a democracy. And so we're going to have to depend on the three branches of government. We're going to have to depend on people coming forward and telling the truth about what happened. You know, what they didn't have this time, Nicole, was any evidence of election fraud. But if they get in there and try to change the outcome, there will be evidence of election fraud. So I'm not trying to reassure anyone that everything's going to be okay, because right now, by my count, we have 6 or 7 states that are in a virtual tie. So this is all about who shows up. And if you don't think this election is important, if you think you only need to show up to vote against Donald Trump, you're not paying attention.
Claire, I know you're on the phone all the time with your former colleagues and you're wired. Just go ahead and take me through the races you're most concerned about, the states you're most concerned about turnout in.
Well, the ones that are really basically tied right now, we've got North Carolina is tied. Democrats need to realize that. North Carolina is tied right now. Ohio is virtually tied right now in the Senate race. I think DeWine is comfortable in the governor's race, but he has shown every once in a while an ability to stand up to Trump. You've got Arizona that is in a virtual tie for many of the races that are very important statewide. Nevada is a tie. I think Pennsylvania, way too many Democrats thought that was over, that Dr. Oz was a joke. This is really a situation where people have to look at this as if it was, if we have presidential turnout, Nicole, America's going to be fine. If we have typical midterm turnout, America's in trouble.
A.B. Stoddard, it is not hyperbole to say that the ideology espoused on the rally stages over the weekend, literally, word by word, sits right at the fulcrum of a current domestic violent extremism threat warning that law enforcement put out. I think I have the text of it. This still sort of holds. The first one went out saying, I think the first one went out 3 weeks after the insurrection, but it's not been withdrawn. The threat hasn't gone away, and it says this: information suggests that some ideologically motivated violent extremists with objections to the exercise of governmental authority in the presidential transition, as well as other perceived grievances fueled by false narratives, could continue to mobilize to incite or commit violence. So that's what they put out and warned every police department in the United States of America about on January 27, 2021. Here's what it says now. This is the most recent one. As the United States enters midterm election season this year, we assess that calls for violence by domestic violent extremists directed at democratic institutions, political candidates, party offices, election events, and election workers will likely increase. So here we have a direct line. What the Republican lies have done is they have endangered, quote, democratic institutions, quote, political candidates, party offices, election events, and election workers. What I know we're done asking where the Republicans are. Do you feel that the messaging is robust enough to lay any of what the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI are warning about at the feet of Republicans who repeat those lies loudly and boldly on debate stages and rally stages?
I think the Democrats are concerned about talking in this issue and campaigns about deniers and election monitors. They feel that the voters want to hear about crime, or they want to hear about inflation, or they want to hear about abortion, but they don't want to hear about
AB, I think we're going to fix your... AB, we're going to have a hard time hearing you, and I don't want to miss a word. We're going to fix your feed. Ari, this is the body and the substance of a lot of sort of the threads you've pulled, reporting-wise. But just first on this intersectionality between the lie and a current threat, do you think that has been conveyed? You know, most people don't read these bulletins, but do you think that is something people are aware of 4 weeks out from the election?
No, I don't think so, Nicole. I think a lot of people feel like the January 6th insurrection was a one-off. It was a unprecedented event that will never happen again. But if you follow what the insurrectionists are saying, January 6th to them was a warm-up. They view this as a training ground for future violent attacks to try to overthrow American democracy. And so on the one hand, we have violence becoming normalized in insurrectionist circles, then we also have the threat of the insurrection broadening, that they're actually trying to institutionalize the insurrection. And that's what all of the election denialism is about. It's about the fact that the coup failed in 2020, so they're trying to do whatever they can to make sure the coup succeeds in 2024. And instead of trying to illegally overthrow an election, they're trying to do it legally by controlling who are the secretaries of state, who the state AGs are, who the governors are. So instead of the elections being certified and then trying to overthrow them after the fact, they're just not going to certify them in the first place. And that's going to make it a lot easier for them to try to overturn the election in the future. So we're at an absolutely chilling moment right now with American democracy. I think you absolutely nailed it, Nicole, which the question is, what kind of democracy are we going to be in 2022? That's really what's on the ballot. Are we going to be the kind of democracy in which people who don't believe in free and fair elections take over the election system, which isn't really a democracy at all? Or are we going to be a democracy that believes in free and fair elections, that believes in counting votes, that believes in encouraging political participation? To me, that's the stakes. It's not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's a what kind of democracy are we going to be at the end of the day issue that matters most in 2022.
Well, and AB, I think, and I hope we have you back, we know it will be lesser. We know it will be less than the quality of democracy we had in 2020, because they're not all going to lose. Some of the election deniers are very likely to win, and we're going to go over to Vaughn in a minute. They're not all going to win, but they're not all going to lose either. So whatever we have, it will be a worse democracy than the democracy we lived in when the insurrection happened in January 2021.
There's no question, and that's part of the problem. Is I think that Democrats are afraid to talk about this issue on the campaign trail. They really feel that the voters want to hear about inflation or crime or abortion, and they're not really touching this as an issue. If a few of these people, these election deniers and election blockers, make it over the finish line, we are going to have an eroded, battered democracy, and we are looking at pressure on the Republican side for these people to cook the books if they don't like the outcome in the next presidential election. So that all it would take is not a January 6th event in the Congress, January 6th of 2025, but in a swing state, a Secretary of State or a governor not certifying the outcome, the election, throwing out batches of votes, creating a narrative of fraud. And that's why these Senate races, yes, they're close. But the idea that Kari Lake is looking like she's finishing strong for the gubernatorial campaign in Arizona, and she's a flat-out election denier. These Secretary of State candidates in certain places like Nevada and also Arizona are doing well, is a five alarm fire. And we don't see people talking about it that are making it clear to voters. I think it's important that there be other people, President Biden, President Obama, some people that come out and talk about this directly with voters, make sure voters understand what a Secretary of State is. If the candidates don't want to talk about it themselves, Democrats have to find somebody to start educating voters about this now.
So Vaughn, take us inside what's going on. Amy Stoddard mentioned Kari Lake. Take us through the Arizona races.
Yeah, I think AB hit it on the nose there. If we get to election night, and you and I are talking to Kohler the day after, and Republicans, these key election deniers have won these key races, whether it be here in Arizona or the governor's race up in Wisconsin, we will have to hit the fact that Democrats did not go toe-to-toe on this democracy issue with these Republicans running for office here. Just take this Katie Hobbs-Kari Lake race here. The advertisements that you see are on abortion and on the inflation, the economy, essentially playing defense for the Democrat here. But what you don't see are campaign advertisements tying Kari Lake to conspiracy theories, to her calls to decertify the 2020 election, her links to Donald Trump. You do not see that. Kari Lake is a candidate we're talking about who has literally called for her opponent, Katie Hobbs, to be arrested. That is the type of candidate we're talking about. Yesterday, last night at the campaign rally we were out in Arizona, Abe Hamadeh, the man running for Attorney General, said he wants to see people in handcuffs. During the rally yesterday, Mark Fincham was sitting off to the sidelines. He's the man running for Secretary of State. He tweeted his Christmas wish is for there to be arrests related to voter fraud. That is what we're talking about here. And yet the Democrats have not gone toe-to-toe. You can look across the board here because they're trying to focus on issues outside of Donald Trump and the democracy issue here at play. And the issue here is that I'm not confident that folks understand the direness of what we're talking about. Yesterday, this is just an anecdote of the Trump rally. You know, a man came up to me and he saw me with the camera crew and he said, "Sir," he goes, "you seem like a nice enough fella, but you need to leave the media." He goes, "If there is a civil war," these are his words, "if there is a civil war, the corporate media are going to be some of the first to go." And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "To die." This is the stakes that we're talking about here. And when you're looking at those moderating voices within the Republican Party, just take Arizona as an example. I've been covering these rallies for years now. They're gone. There is no Jeff Flake. There's no John McCain. There's no Martha McSally. Clint Hickman, a man, he is the chairman of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors who oversaw the 2020 election here. A man was arrested in Iowa last week for threatening to hang him. He's not at these events anymore, despite him being there at the rally right before the 2020 election and voting for Donald Trump. Rusty Bowers is not there anymore. These events are now a mechanism to try to overturn the elections, and they have told us that specifically. I talked to Mark Fincham yesterday, and I asked him the question, is there any reason to believe that this election, these midterms, are going to be free and fair? And he said that he's not confident. I mean, they're laying it out there for all of us to hear.
Vaughn, I'm going to need you to say more. Let me just give you this. Do any of them think that if they win, the elections are rigged, or they rigged only if they lose?
What?
Well, they got to cook.
Well,
Until
let's
it
just use
dings.
an example. Kari Lake was
Until
making
it
claims in the
dings.
days before her primary, her close primary, that there were
Time to go to bed,
irregularities and fraud. And yet, of course, up to that night
Yeah,
before
you
the
go to
election,
sleep
we were
now.
still trying to ask her what examples of evidence does she actually have. And to this day here, October 10th, Kari Lake has still yet to provide any examples. And she was there standing on stage next to Donald Trump as Donald Trump openly flirted again, suggesting that these midterm elections may not be fair and accurate. They're already setting the stage to what could lead to chaos in this election, and there's a very
somebody shoot
real
'em.
possibility that these folks
Wow.
could outright win, though, and those contested
Wow.
efforts on their behalfs may not even matter.
I have to ask you one more question. Vaughn, when they told you that you'd be the first to be killed, to the first to die, do you feel safe out there?
I think the hardest part, Nicole, is that at one point in covering Trump rallies and Republican voters, I think I'm able to usually open up my heart and allow people to hear who I am and hear them out. This point in time, folks don't want to get to know you. The time for, I think, war in the most literal of terms is right about now. And Donald Trump, you know, it used to be a laughing line about that the members of the media were the enemies of the state, or that the Democratic Party was the opposition. But it's very real terms now. They take him very literally, more than ever before. And trying to engage with so many of these folks, it's a non-starter. I mean, this goes beyond QAnon believers. This comes down to folks that are voters, that truly believe there is an effort to undermine this democracy. Not the democracy we're talking about, but the effort to undermine the democracy by putting Joe Biden and the likes of these Democrats into office. It's a completely warped reality, one that you can't even, if you tried to have a conversation with so many of these folks, you couldn't get to a place of reality because they're not living in it.
I mean, Ari Berman, Vaughn's reporting and his experience as an eyewitness to this and the evolution of how he sees this is so powerful. And, you know, in the one sense, it affirms that we on this show, we've been covering the attacks to democracy since before Trump lost, because he started asking his voters to vote twice. He started seeking to commit voter fraud before he lost. He also started talking about the election being rigged in the summer before he lost. And then he started talking about not leaving office on a debate stage. So the attacks on democracy, and it's really not a Trump story anymore. It's about one of the two parties, like I said at the top, Breaking Bad, being an anti-democratic force. And again, if this were happening in a country that the State Department monitored, we'd put it on the watch list for a country with anti-democratic, you know, powers rising, and it would go on that list. And the leaders with the calls with those countries' leaders on that rising, you know, authoritarian, anti-democratic practices would have sort of some stern conversations with whoever the American president is at the time. That is all over. We are now the country with a sick democracy, and with one of the two political parties in this country not just lurching toward authoritarianism, but running on it. You've been writing stories about this for 3 years. What is the issue in terms of putting this front and center before the American people and having this conversation in real terms?
Well, I think that the central story of American politics right now is the struggle to preserve American democracy as we've known it for hundreds of years. And I'm not sure the issue is being covered that way. I'm not sure the issue of democracy is even being covered at all sometimes, but when it is covered, it's often covered through a partisan lens, it's often covered through a political lens, as opposed to the fact of the institutions that we've taken for granted for so long are now about to be subverted from within. And democracy is dying not from external threats, but from internal threats that people are running very openly, as Vaughn talked about, on overthrowing American democracy. Now, that is the central campaign issue of the Republican Party in 2022, is overthrowing American democracy. And instead of trying to do it illegally, try to do it legally. And it really is shocking to me that Democrats aren't talking more about the issue. And it's true, some Democrats are talking about it. So I don't want to paint so broad of a brush, because there are Democrats that are very, very focused on American democracy. They're talking about it every single day. But the fact that it's not resonating in places like Arizona or Nevada, the fact that Democratic Secretary of State candidates are being outraised by insurrectionist Republicans in Arizona, in Nevada, and other states is incredibly alarming. The fact that you hear strategists saying we need to start focusing on these races now. Why are they focusing on these races now? Why weren't they focused on this a year ago when it was obvious this plan was in motion? So it's very obvious what's been happening, Nicole. You had first Donald Trump spread lies about the election. Then he tried to overthrow the election. Then they tried to change the voting laws in all of these key states to make it easier for the insurrectionists to win. Now the insurrectionists are actually running to win. So we've seen over and over democracy being
just like Putin does,
systematically, one step after another. And we're reaching the point where it's becoming too late to do anything about it. That if indeed some of these people win in 2022, some of these election deniers win in 2022, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to have a fair election in these states in 2024.
Well, it is incumbent upon Republican strategists who know exactly how to talk to Republican voters to come out of the woodwork and write their Daisy ad or write their nuclear threat ad or communicate with Republican voters that if you vote for the election deniers, which is, I think, 42% of the Republican candidates on the ballot in this country in November, you will be voting against your democracy. You will be voting against your vote counting on issues of the economy, abortion, healthcare, schools, everything. If you lose your democracy, you lose everything. I need all of you to stick around. I do have to sneak in a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more on this conversation, how this fight for democracy is taking the center stage all through the country in these midterms. We'll show you one Democratic candidate's take on how to confront Ron QAnon Johnson. That's next. Plus, there is brand new reporting today on what the ex-president asked the National Archives to give him, as in a trade, a classified document swap for turning over some of the things he stole from the White House. Again, not denying he took them. And what we know this afternoon about one of his lawyers who had claimed on his behalf that everything was returned. The very latest on how federal investigators leaders appear to be moving quickly on that front. Later in the program, Republicans over the weekend doing even more fear-mongering about crime. They bring the bottom of the barrel on another issue, too. The replacement theory, racism, showing just how far down to the bottom of the swamp they have gone in a desperate and dangerous attempt to cling to power. All those stories and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.